I'm gonna. Hey everyone, welcome to GTM Field Notes, a Syft series where we talk to GTM leaders about what's actually changing in the field, not the LinkedIn hype, but the actual workflows, failures, experiments that show up in real revenue teams. Today, I'm joined by my friend and co-host Greg Kennedy, founder
Hello,
of
hello.
SaaS and a three-time CMO himself. And we are talking with a friend of mine, Keith Putnam-Delaney, who's the founder of Primer. Thanks for coming onto the show, Keith.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
All right, so let's kind of with the story that you have about $800 CPM that like Greg really wants to talk
Oh yeah,
about.
I was very excited about that. Yeah, so okay, so first of all, I have to kick this off with like I still love the fact that CPM is the odd man out when it comes to all of the acronyms we use for
Mm,
these metrics. I've been around long enough to like remember when these things emerged. So I
yeah.
still love that part, right? So when it comes to like, and I'm also going to assume that everyone listening to this totally understands what a CPM is. So we're not going to explain it for people. But you have the story or you had this experience where we all know that CPMs are high on
Yeah.
LinkedIn in particular, right? $20, $25, pretty normal. But you experienced something like 800, maybe more, and you're still able to get ROI out of it. Is that true? And I'd love to hear more about that because like I do think this is a very common issue. I hear from
Mhm.
people, and I'm going to even go as far to say like junior marketers have been around. It's okay. I'm okay with it. I'm old, right? Younger people that maybe don't have much experience. You're very nervous when the CPM spike. Something like $800, they would be really, really concerned about. So let's just talk
Mhm.
about that anecdote and that story, and like, how did you handle that?
Yeah. So, I mean, the where that data comes from or that
Okay.
reference point actually comes from some of our customers at Primer. So when we look across kind of the average CPMs, we see this pretty wide range on LinkedIn in particular. And the $800 one really stood out because it's just crazy that somebody was willing to pay that and willing to pay that for a sustained period of time. So, it must work for them to pay that cost. But
Yeah.
I think what's most interesting about all this is how the dynamics have shifted in paid, in particular, around demand and supply. Right, you have a fixed number of eyeballs. Right, our population is not growing very quickly. The- I don't even know if we're in the U.S. at the reproduce. What do they call it? Anyway, you have just a shit ton of uh, of demand for inventory, and it's
Mm.
easier than ever to produce ad content. So it's just caused this skyrocketing in CPMs on LinkedIn in particular. And yeah, I don't know if the CAC really penciled at that level, but I find it fascinating that that in some places in the marketplace, the cost of data is going down very, very dramatically. And
Mhm.
then in others, it's just wildly going up. Yeah,
Is that
captive
just
market.
inherent to LinkedIn? As in, like, LinkedIn is trying to increase their inventory. That's why we see all sorts of random stuff like games and stuff, right? Like because they want to
Sure.
have people on the platform. I used to work at
Yeah.
Snap. I know how the game is played. No pun intended. But the is that like the 800 CPM like an artifact of just like lower inventory levels on LinkedIn? Is it just like, oh, you have to pay $800 because the more finer you're targeting, the more premium you have to pay? Like what's like the
It's a great question. It's two primary. I mean, the three factors that constrain it are volume of amount of inventory, right, which is somewhat more limited on LinkedIn compared to networks like Meta and Google. It's just it is a little bit smaller, but really the main thing is a lot of people try to target at such a narrow niche level that the way the auction works, right? It's the how much friction is this going to create in the user experience? Then how many other people are bidding for this inventory? So the and then you just have more people bidding now too. So those three things just sort of conflate to create a very high CPM. This is not true on platforms like Reddit, right? Reddit still has a $3 Meta, even in B2B and Meta, you're seeing like 15, 30, maybe max ever. And then YouTube's cheap. So there's definitely still cheap inventory out there. It's just, yeah, in B2B, smaller audiences, limited places to advertise to them, and high degree of competition and willingness to pay.
Is then does that mean that like when it comes to LinkedIn
Mhm.
specifically, you're better off using LinkedIn for bottom of funnel, like really like
Yeah,
think of it as like Google keyword, pretty much that kind of like, you know.
I think so. I think so. And then the other thing you have to do is play with different formats because
Mm.
different formats on LinkedIn are much more
Mm.
expensive than others. Like CTV, their connected TV ad platform is still pretty reasonable. It's like $20 to $40 CPMs. Thought leader ads can be relatively inexpensive, but other formats not so great. And what's really interesting to me is this is all happening under the umbrella of the cost for sending outbound email has plummeted, right? Just, I'm not even talking about the lead delivery. I'm just talking about like the cost per record, right? Of just getting prospects. And as that's plummeted, obviously people are flooding inboxes. Those email outbound has gotten decreasingly effective. And that's also causing some of the shift into paid.
That's a very interesting observation. Yeah. Like a year ago, I actually did a post about this. I ran some numbers because I always think like email outbound is actually in a way competing with ads, right? If you think about email outbound as like a demand generation channel rather than sort of a capture channel, and like at least a year or 2 years, like, you know, a few months, 18 months ago, like I think on order of magnitude, even more, like in terms of like, you know, if you do the math of like, but now deliverability is just so expensive. People are burning their inboxes like every few days. That number doesn't pencil right on the
Yeah.
on that side as well. So that's actually a very interesting point that like now they're almost sort of similar, and ads obviously come with like, that's the beauty of ads is like, you know, it has that deliverability aspect that like email just simply doesn't. Like it's I mean, you give up a little bit of targeting, but you know, but you get better deliverability. So like it's kind of
I'm curious to hear, like, are you seeing that directly? Because, like, I've heard anecdotally about I've heard anecdotally all these things where they're all or I've heard them all independently, but are you
Mhm.
really talking to people, like, literally are like, "Hey, my cold outbound, my email is just not what it was. I actually need to shift budget
Definitely. Yeah.
to something like LinkedIn."
Yeah, I mean, it's a number of our customers, folks that were never investing heavily in paid, all of a sudden are because they could count on this channel of cold email, and now they can't. Right?
Can't. Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting. Yeah, 'cause I've definitely heard from so I like to frame it as that everyone I know, if they're a startup or they don't have a big brand, the cold email, like, just doesn't work at all. Still do talk to people with, like, a large brand, and meaning, like, they have some kind of awareness in their category, and those are the only people that I talk to where they seem to be able to make it work to some degree. There's some people who tell me, like, it works really well too, like, that's the other thing. I do get these anomalies where they're like, "No, it's great, it still works."
yeah.
And that's always been my
The
guess.
the
Curious what you think.
pattern there's a pattern there though, which is there's still segments that also pick up phone calls, right? That don't screen. Like
Yes.
I screen my calls. But there are definitely personas that have not been saturated yet,
Mm.
and you can still see good reply rates with them. There's people that I don't want to. I feel like I'm sounding a little patronizing, but like people that still like download case studies, and go through the
Mm.
gated content form. That still works in certain
Yeah.
industries. Yeah,
yeah. Content syndication is a big thing. Yes, I think there is also like one other thing about cold outbound to Greg's point. I think it has just become a zero click channel, right? Because you can't put links, you have no tracking,
Yes.
like you have like, and surprisingly,
Mhm.
paid is actually one remaining channel which is not zero click yet, right? And so so that's kind of I think another thing that kind of is hitting cold email now, which is just you just have very little visibility in deliverability or any of that stuff. I want to.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a little bit about Meta and Reddit in terms of inventory and so on. And one of the big things about Primer is that it unlocks that chat and that audience for B2B marketers,
Yeah.
and you get match rates that were thought to be impossible. So I guess my question is a little bit more less about the technical. Why do people think, first of all, that B2B buyers don't exist on those channels?
Yeah.
And and what does the match rate, like on the technical side, gap reveal about this identity resolution quality across the industry? So I guess two parts.
Sure. Context, actually, to set the stage a little bit. The reason why, one of the reasons why Primer even exists is because I used to run a cold email spam machine where we were sending 100,000 messages a week. And I had these lists of, work emails, and I would upload them to Meta, and I would get a 10% match rate, right? Because you don't log into Meta with your work email. And Meta doesn't know your work identity. And that's actually what kind of like got me thinking, all right, exploring the data space outside of just kind of like the Apollos and Zoom infos into, all right, where can I get that personal email? Right. And that led me down the primrose path to then, enriching these lists and uploading them. And that all of a sudden unlocked Meta's performance for me. The path from there though, to answer the question of like why do people think B2B buyers aren't on Meta? I think for a long time advertising was contextual, right? If you go back to the early days of advertising, it was all right, I'm going to buy media in a magazine that I know my buyer reads, right? And that sort of carried through even into the 2010s around digital. It was like, all right, we do display ads, and then I know these people are on LinkedIn and they're thinking about work, so I'm going to advertise there. But the world changed, and we think about work for better or for worse all the time. And there's some people who hang out on LinkedIn. There's others who just doom scroll on Instagram. There's a lot that do both, and that's where I think the mindset started to shift. And it's really just like kind of old school, I would say, a lot, maybe an older generation of marketers, and I'm a millennial. I'm not like terribly young anymore. That think that like, oh no, these channels aren't B2B anymore. Yeah, that's my read. Yeah,
Yeah. Also think that it's like there is an interrupt. Is it like when you are in a B2C context and a B2B ad shows up, it actually is more memorable than like, if you were like in a B2B context and a B2B ad shows up.
for sure, for sure.
Yeah, it's a legacy of contextual advertising. And then my experience has been that most executive teams, they're older or they're my age, and so they're very comfortable with it. They were very uncomfortable with like. There's even a point where people were uncomfortable with like they knew that the user was perhaps on this certain type of site, but they just didn't want their brand to be associated with the content on there. That was like the
Right.
original pushback with UGC was like, why would I want to have my ad next to someone's whatever personal video?
Yep.
Right. And so I remember that actually being another issue. And now, like, that's just where people are. They're on these other channels. You don't have a big contextual set of media to buy from, maybe in TV, right? That's it.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, there's still those traditional media channels, but yeah, that's it. Yeah,
should we move on? Emma, you want to talk about email supply chains and traits?
I mean, I know somehow, like I know a little bit about how the sausage is made, but like Greg
yeah,
has like this question about like the personal to professional identity.
sure.
Yeah, yeah. I think
Yeah.
you opened the big door there with like, hey,
Mhm.
got this giant list because I've experienced this. Put it in, and there's a lot of systems, and you're like, wait, this match rate's really low, right? And
Mhm.
it's full of like Yahoo and Gmail, and there's the odd AOL email in there. So just help us understand like I guess I would even be really broad, like your perspective on it and how this is working and maybe how you approach it even would be interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways I could come at that question,
Yeah.
but maybe I'll take a step back and say, like, identity resolution is something that exists in our lives all the time, but nobody really talks about, right? Every time you get served, you visit one website, and all of a sudden and you like, abandon your shopping cart and you start seeing ads everywhere. That's essentially a form of identity resolution,
Yeah.
right? They're syncing data together to say, is this visitor on my website the same visitor that came from that was on Nike.com a few minutes ago? When you're applying for a loan, right, and you get that automated approval at the same time, there's a whole underwriting process that's happening underneath the hood where they're fetching data on you that exists out there in the ether. Making sure it matches up to, this data is about Keith, and then they're leveraging that to try to make a fast, underwriting process and approve that loan in seconds. What used to take, people days. So identity resolution is a thing, right? A lot of it exists in ad tech, but a lot of it is based off of probabilistic like matching, right? It's saying like and cookie syncing and IPs and all this like kind of shit that's very brittle and fragile. But there are ways that you can link people's identity in much more robust, kind of deterministic ways. So let's say you use Apollo, right? Or Zoom Info for your work emails, right? And your sales prospecting. Well, they have everybody's LinkedIn profile. And oftentimes LinkedIn is like kind of the key join for them, right? That's the thing that matters the most. You can go out and you can find other data sets that are more personal oriented, like consumer oriented, that also have LinkedIn profiles. And then all of a sudden you say, I've got Keith here with his work identity. I see Keith, the same LinkedIn profile with Keith's, personal identity. I can safely join them together with some degree. There's always going to be mismatches, but with some degree of quality assurance that, yeah, if I see, I can safely link these two profiles and leverage that information. The key in all of this as well, like, so that's basically how you can do more high quality identity resolution. And that's
Mhm.
kind of the foundation that Primer's built upon. Obviously, with the caveat that you only want to get that data from opted in sources, right? Has to stay privacy compliant. But yeah. And once you do that though, you can unlock a lot of other channels. You're basically porting someone's identity into all these different ecosystems, right? Facebook doesn't know my work identity, but all of a sudden I can join that, right? Same thing that happens across, you can imagine like every ad network, every ad, ecos platform.
And so there are lots of different identifiers, right? Like LinkedIn profile, work email,
Mhm.
phone numbers, like there's social security numbers, like the identity resolution space has a lot. But if we restrict ourselves to like, what Primer does and like, just
Yeah.
generally the B2B marketing space, is it fair to say that like personal email remains like the most important one, like or the hashed email or ham, whatever we call them,
Yeah.
across all ad networks? Like if you have like personal email, that seems to be the best one.
That's right. That's right. And the main reason is you have to log in, right? To all of these, the paid social ecosystem, the Googles, the LinkedIn's, the Reddit, you have to log in and you have to create an account, and you often create your account with, that personal email, that mobile phone number, maybe like TikTok kind of pushes for the mobile phone number.
Right.
Those, so that remains kind of the gold standard. This is also why generic display advertising is kind of shitty, because most publishers don't make you log in to consume their content. So to them, they don't really know who you are. They're guessing. So every time you serve display ads, there's a very, very high degree of likelihood that isn't like that basically the publisher is saying, oh yeah. He's on my website, place your ad here. And it's like, no, he's not. That's just fucking fraud. Like you just want our money. And that's kind of how display advertising works. The
So
amount
is
of
it
ad
like
fraud is bonkers.
right, right? So besides personal email, you say like, okay, now mobile cell phone numbers are like another like big thing. Is that is that a new thing because of TikTok and other networks, or is it like how much of your customer base, like like you would say, like if I was aiming for a high match rate, would you recommend starting with personal emails and cell phones, or like what how
I would Personal email is by far the biggest driver. Mobile phone after that. If you're trying to build a custom audience for Twitter handles really important, or some X handles. And then the other, a sneaky one is individual zip code. Not, that's a key one. And then MAIDs, mobile advertiser IDs, can also be really.
I thought maids were like sort of after the whole Apple thing. Okay,
They
they're still.
they they're still out there. There's still a lot of people who use Android. You know, yeah.
So you mentioned like opted in, right? Like you were like, okay,
Mhm.
you want to make sure that like the provenance of this data that
Yeah.
you're getting is from opted in. As a buyer, right? Like let's say you are an
Mhm.
enterprise company, you're like trying to run like these campaigns. You're using this data to target people. And if they go to Primer, if they go to like metadata. I don't know if those folks do some of the matching stuff. Like, like we do some actually enrichment as well ourselves. Do they should they demand a chain of custody? Like how can any vendor in this industry honestly answer where where the mapping came from, and was it opted in?
Yeah.
Like is provenance something that buyers should demand in contracts?
Yes. Otherwise, they're putting themselves at significant litigation risk, right? Yeah, I mean, if you want to go out and buy data from dudes with long hair in Florida, yeah, they're sitting on millions of email addresses, and they'll sell you a list, no problem, no questions asked. But good luck suing them later on because they'll disappear or to the Bahamas. I don't know. Like, so there's definitely a shady underbelly of data.
Mhm.
But then there are suppliers that are above board and then within the contracts with those, yeah, you do have to make sure you structure it in such a way that they are taking responsibility for that data.
So it's like if I was a buyer, like I'm pretty sure you do it with your
Mhm.
upstream suppliers. And so and then like when I do a contract with Primer, like, how do you kind of provide those? Like, are they in your DPA with the?
In our master services agreement, our data processing addendum, we make sure and then we also, of course, require our customers to make sure that they're leveraging the data in an above board fashion, right? That they're not reselling it without consent, yada yada yada. So that's really key. Yeah, yeah. This doesn't work as well outside the United States. The U.S. is pretty liberal, so our match rates in Europe are about half as good as they are in the US, just because there's less access to that opted in data. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Why don't we so this is interesting, and like I want to move on and talk
Mhm.
about like how AI is perhaps influencing this. So you've started to see
Yeah.
stories about AI data contamination. There's lots of scraping happening. Like you
Sure.
talked about the way that you're working to manage your data, make sure it's all collected and managed appropriately. But as we know, there's an ecosystem of other buyers out there that maybe aren't as careful. And besides like just acquiring data in a way that is perhaps not done following all of the regulatory
Mhm.
requirements,
Ethically sourced.
now that can just get into the mix, maybe even hallucinate. I'm
Sure.
curious to hear like how you think AI is influencing this and perhaps changing this entire space.
You know, there's if you talk to any data engineer, they're going to say garbage in, garbage out, right? And that's true with data. So, I think when there's a ton of cataloging that's being done by AI across, the public web, scraping data, then saying, hey, yep, this company is PLG, this company's ABM, this company, yeah, whatever it is. And some of that's going to be accurate, some of it isn't. You really just have to validate the data. So every time we work with a data vendor or explore a new data vendor, we run a test, right? We have an
Mm,
evaluation, and we actually spot check records and we look for their accuracy rate. Now, accuracy is another like kind of thorny topic because like what is accurate? Like what
mm,
is a company's headcount? Is it what's on LinkedIn? Is it or probably not because there are
yeah.
random people attached to the member profile on LinkedIn, right? Or there's people that didn't maybe left the company but didn't update their LinkedIn profile. So accuracy is actually like really like a lot of people don't think about accuracy as being something that's somewhat fluid. There's a
Mhm.
range of accuracy.
There is no golden truth sometimes.
Exactly. So one thing we do is we spot check for quality. We also spot check. We also look for coverage, right? Number of records. And we look for recency, is associated with the quality. But then I think the other thing that's kind of like really interesting about AI is even before LLMs, you had certain data sets that were getting clamped down on. And I think that's only going to accelerate, right? You have a lot more companies with publicly available data that are trying to restrict it, right? Like, like restrict bot scraping. LinkedIn is like famous for this, right? It used to be very, very easy to scrape a LinkedIn public profiles, and it was deemed legal because it was public. But then they started obfuscating, right? Like when you go to a public profile, they only show a little bit of it, a little bit of it. And what became kind of interesting, and I think a similar dynamic might end up happening in other categories of data, of scrape data, is that, the people who are the first to do massive amounts of LinkedIn scraping
Mhm.
built up a repository and a corpus of knowledge about everybody's profile. So then if they check a profile and they only get a little bit of it, then they can add that to their sort
Yeah.
of historical set of data. And now what you've kind of ended up with is there's only about 5 companies in the world that have enough scale of LinkedIn scrape data that, and they kind of have a lock on the market at this
Yeah.
point, and they're competing against each other. And the price of data is not going to go entirely to zero. It's gone down a lot compared to where it used to be,
Mhm.
but there's really only 5 suppliers. And by the way, anybody who's listening to this, any sales prospecting tool you go to, they buy from those 5 suppliers, like
Yeah.
guaranteed.
Yes, a lot of like like a lot of like IP enrichment.
Yeah.
Once same, you can trace the supply to like a handful of
Few
them.
people. Two main companies in the website de-anonymization.
Right. And so like, it's just sort of I think that is, at least on the IP side, I think it's like about four is like what I know of. But yeah, I guess on that point, like, so people think that, okay, the way you improve coverage and accuracy is you do waterfalls, right? Like people will do waterfalls, like, like I'm going to use like 4 data providers, try to enrich my personal work email to personal email using like whatever, right? A waterfall. Does that, like, what is your opinion on that? Like, I mean, like we have
Mhm.
waterfalls, we do them a bit differently.
For sure.
But does running like 5 providers in sequence actually solve accuracy, actually solve coverage, or is that just like you're just making somebody else rich?
It does up to a certain point, right? So the thing about data is it has a marginal rate of return. As you add, like, think of it like a Venn diagram, right? You add, or maybe a concentric circles, actually. You add one data provider, right? And that might get you actually like 80% of the coverage. You add another data provider outside of it, and that might boost you up to 90%. Then you add another one, and that gets you to 92, and so on and so forth. So at some point, you just basically start asking yourself, how much value am I getting
Yeah.
for, what's the ROI on incrementally adding more and more data? Yeah.
And then do you, like, in terms of like, if when you do your, like, when the way you improve your match rates, I'm assuming your waterfalls, like, because sometimes what happens is like they don't agree. Like a lot of our customers will come in and say, "Oh, I ran like Vector and I ran RB2B and I
Yeah.
ran something else. I ran Syft." And then you guys all kind of, they're like, "Okay, well, it doesn't, two providers agree, the third one don't, doesn't, right?" And like
Mhm.
we actually now have RB2B in our own waterfall. So, but let's say you're running like Syft and Vector together. So, and they're surprised by like, okay, well, why don't things agree? And so how do you kind of, when you are building your waterfall with different data providers, like how do you kind of, and do you use that to kind of improve accuracy? Like, is there some sort of a voting thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Short answer is yes to the rewarding thing. We basically, I mean, a very simple way to approach it is to say, all right, even there is no like golden truth per se, but there's definitely data providers that are more accurate than other ones, right? And you can do that through your spot checks. Put that, put those early in your waterfall, right? And leave. And then when there's disagreements, you can basically pick a winner, especially if you have multiple, like sometimes if you have like 4 data providers, 3 of them agree, one of them doesn't. Well, what should you do? Probably go with the 3 that agree, right? And then you can create rules around this. It doesn't have to be that complex if you're building this in house. And then the more sophisticated you get, the people like the folks like People Data Labs do it, build many algorithms around this.
Yeah.
And then at some point, we just like rely on them, right? We know you, and this is your core competency. You invest a lot in this. That's part of the reason why we see your data is better. We're gonna, we know you're gonna continue to invest in it. We're gonna go
Yeah.
with you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a lot of like, we spend quite a bit of time in our waterfalls to find the optimal
Yeah.
sequencing and so on.
Yeah.
And then like it's all a supply, like, then upstream, our providers are also doing some of that.
Right.
So,
Totally.
right.
It's such a, and then it's like you have, I don't know, it's such a weird, like network of relationships that are, I think if I'm like a RevOps person or marketing or whatever, and I'm evaluating it, and you have no idea, but like Zoom Info, both a Zoom Info and Apollo get their mobile phone numbers from the same place, like a huge chunk of them. Like,
Mm.
and then you're saying, oh no, Zoom Info is better, Apollo's worse. Like, is it? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Uh,
There's definitely like, yeah, there are a lot of parameters that you have to optimize when you build a waterfall. Like it's not as simple as like, just like, yeah, run a bunch of them in sequence.
yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's talk about okay, so we've talked a lot about I think we've actually covered the kind of like third party data segment
Hmm.
to some degree, right? So the next thing that I think most people watching this, if they're in marketing, the question is now first party data, like my own system, my own CRM, my own first party data. Like, what is your perspective on it, right? And I think there's a couple of different angles for this. It's like, what do you recommend when it comes to like incorporating their own first party data into this? What do you recommend when it comes to like maybe measuring, tracking, and saving some of the third party data that they're activating given the agreement they've signed, right? And the agreements are
Hmm.
different. And then what do you think in terms of just like syncing and managing this to your CRM? Like, I feel like we've seen a couple different generations of technologies that measure and manage this on the data
Hmm.
side. And, now like things like cookies doesn't appear they'll maybe ever go away, but
Yeah.
they're like less impactful than they've ever been. A lot of the
Right.
older systems were, I'm gonna say, primarily cookie based. So you have that
Mhm.
that complexity there. So what is your thoughts on like, okay, I am the marketing ops person, I'm the CMO, I've got this ecosystem of like tools that I'm working with third party providers. Like, how do you think people should navigate that whole space?
There's a lot of ways to slice that. I'll start with
Yes.
like trying to understand what's working, right? So
Okay.
you mentioned like feeding conversion data back to ad platforms. So the way I think about it is, yeah, you want to send as much signal back about, and I
Mm,
think outbound tools are heading in this direction too. You try to send signal back about what's working so that the they can optimize the recommendations and the placements, right? But that's not your source of truth really ultimately for are you winning, right?
mhm.
Then you have to look at your own sort of conversion data that you're capturing and saying, all right, what appears to be working here, what doesn't. And then to get really scientific, you have to be willing to make incrementality tests, right? You have to be willing to have a holdout group because that's the only way to really know if it's causal, right? That I did this one thing, and I didn't do it to this group here that's similar to my exposed population. Did that one thing create lift or not? And it's candidly like it's in part because cookies have gone the way of the dodo and IDFA and all of that. You have to triangulate,
Y-
and to say that you
Yeah.
have the perfect sort of attribution system is bullshit. It just doesn't. It's impossible to have
Yeah,
these
so
things.
if you're then the question is like, if you're collecting the attribution and conversion data, like, do you own
Mhm.
that? That's one question.
That is a great question. I mean, or should we talk about what HubSpot did over the course of the last 3 weeks, month? Did you
Sure.
guys see that?
Give
Yeah.
us some juice.
Yeah. So I'm gonna spill the tea. Google it. HubSpot basically made an announcement saying, and they really messed this up. They made an announcement saying, hey, long story short, we're gonna aggregate the data across our customers in their CRMs and use it to help enrich other customers' CRMs, right?
Mm.
Essentially, they're going to turn themselves into a giant data co-op. Hey, I actually think it was like a genius idea at the end of the day, but they just kind of mishandled it and ended up walking it back. We're very
They're
mad.
really upset. Yeah.
If they had made it an opt-in instead of opt-out, I think it could have gone over quite well. But, why did they wanna do this and why is that valuable? I do think, like, co-opting data and you have to be considerate about what data you share and how it gets shared with others, but it can be it can be a superpower for a business because all of a sudden you can get access to data that's much fresher, has a higher degree of signal quality than you could from other places, from just buying kind of lists from brokers that may or may not like to so have gone through like a weird supply chain themselves. It's almost like going it's like going to Fiji for the water instead of going to Flint, Michigan. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know you only have a few more minutes, but I think actually the HubSpot example is a really good one to talk about. And I think it summarizes a lot of this ideas about first party data, third party data, targeting data, conversion data, who owns what. In my experience, it's the very large customers who want to exert the most control. And so they try to just take this
For
perspective
sure.
of like, we own everything. It's
Yep.
like we're like, so Disney would do this. We
Yeah.
own everything. The conversion data, they would claim like that is our user, which we could
Yep.
to some degree mathematically prove wasn't like really their user. They would try to like own as much of it as possible, which is why like what HubSpot is doing benefits maybe everyone on the HubSpot ecosystem, but it doesn't really benefit someone who is like a Disney, right? They would say like, we have the largest data set that we've spent all this effort and
Yeah.
energy.
I mean, to be
like,
fair though, like, I mean, HubSpot's a lot of HubSpot customers are like SMB mid market.
Right.
I think regulatory,
100%.
I think in our experience, even like, even early stage startups, for example, are actually very cognizant about data privacy and other things. So like I actually was, HubSpot doing this co-op stuff like sneakily. I'm very surprised that maybe their bet was that like, like maybe small people kind of really don't care about this. But
Mhm.
in my experience, that's not true. Like, people like generally understand and they're very risk averse. It's not only on the cookie and on this data side, like generally like even like providers using their data for AI training, for example, like I've written about this, like, one of the very common clauses that gets reviewed now by
Yeah.
just again, for when vendors kind of put out the contract. So, but anyway, we are at time. And there were like a bunch of other questions that like, like queued up, and then, like, we could have gotten more juice out of you, maybe like for another time. But thanks for, stopping by. And I know you are like,
That was
almost
great.
out of the door for your vacation, but it's so nice to chat with you.
This is great. Yeah. If we could keep going and jam again in the future, really appreciate you having me.
Right. We'll
And
just wait for
hope-
another. We'll just wait for another HubSpot scandal, and then we'll.
there you go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we could do a reaction video. Okay.
I
All right.
love it. All right.
All right.
Thank, talk
Thank
soon.
you.